Hello, and welcome back to this week's edition of the Blame Game. Semis delivered with some super fun games this weekend. Both of them were 3-1s, but we're going to dive right into this week's topic as both Zeka and Faker bought Oblivion Orbs, and we got to talk about that. I'm going to nip this in the bud right away because I know how these conversations can progress, and I'm not flaming anyone, and this is not a video indirectly subtweeting one particular person. You might think it's about Shaka, you might think it's about LS, you might think it's about whatever content creator I don't follow or even know has said that they have the opposite opinion of whatever I'm going to state in this video. It's not about any one specific person there. Also, this conversation will be nuanced and will require math, so I'm going to state my conclusion at the start of this video, then show the math, then talk about build path and reasoning, all of which are going to use the Faker/Zeka games as examples. So starting with the conclusion, Shaka notes in his tweet that these numbers do not include healing regen reduction when the tooltips display the amount of healing that was reduced. Many people meme on pro players for still rushing this item when the tooltip shows 0 to like 50 damage reduced through 10-15 minutes into the game, with the argument being that delaying your mythic for this incremental tiny damage increase is not worth it. However, these Oblivion Orb rushes are done specifically into melee champs that go D-Shield, Second Wind, and usually have the third highest base regen in the game. When you factor this health regen reduction into the equation, I'm going to argue that building it first in winning matchups and utilizing it correctly to try and get extra pressure in the lane phase can be worth it. Hopefully, by the time you reach the end of this video, even if you don't agree with my conclusion, you'll realize that judging these items off the tooltip and going, haha, no healing, therefore bad, is not really fair, and there's more nuance to the conversation. Cut in from Future Mark with concrete numbers that I just got from Shakarez and replay files, who was helping me out make this video. And I need to share these at the start to show that everything we're about to talk about is not just theoretical, but these are the actual numbers. In the Ari vs. Sylas game, from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, Zeka's Oblivion Orb reduced 189.9 healing from regen. The tooltip claimed that it reduced 0. For context, Scorch did 151 damage in that window, and Ari did 256. Chovy takes 2 resets during those 5 minutes, and the first one had reduced 116 at that point. Chovy was sitting at 116 lower health in lane than he otherwise would be. I know some people don't like Scorch and early game runes, and you might still argue that this Oblivion Orb purchase is not worth it. But again, we're talking about 190 invisible damage that is not getting reported. So we can talk about how the tooltip is literally useless for deciding if you got value out of this item or not. Alrighty, let's get into it by digging into the math of how this stuff is actually going to get calculated. Now, I'm going to try and actually underestimate most values here because there's going to be ranges that it could be between. And I'm not trying to do any funky hand wavy stuff by trying to overestimate values. So as I go through here, I'll take notes of time that I'm actually going to be doing underestimation rather than overestimation. Now, like I said, these are usually built into Akali and Sylas, and you're usually going to get this recall off to pick up your Oblivion Orb rush between 4:30 and 5 minutes into the game, and almost every single time for pro players, they're level 5 at this point unless something has gone catastrophically wrong. So the numbers that we're going to be looking at for Akali and Sylas are going to be basically base HP values at level 5 with Doran's shield factored in, which gives you a little bit of extra health and a little bit of extra HP per 5 regen. So here you can see their values of health at these level 5, as well as when you add in the 80 from D shield and the 6 extra HP per 5 from the regen. Usually lane phase and pro play is ending around level 10. It's like 15 minutes into the game. You might hit 11, might end a little earlier depending on how fast paced it is. In the examples that we're going to look at today, you will see that most of the time these players are hitting level 10 right around the time lane phase is breaking open. So I've used that as kind of like the upper end of where their HP and HP regen values are going to get to. Now right away, here's 2 ways I'm intentionally underestimating the amount of healing regen that will get cut. First off, Second Wind will continue to scale down until you're theoretically at 1 HP getting hit, and it'll kick in and calculate from there. But for all my calculations, I'm going to basically say the max is at 75%. Realistically, in combat situations, they don't often get much below this anyway, so I'm not trying to pretend like they're always getting hit at max value, because that's not the case. And the other thing is, a lot of the time, for like a Sylas, you'll pick up a Ruby Crystal or Kindle Gem, whether they're the full thing or not. For Akali, she will often go Hex Tech Alternator or something, and so it's very likely that they pick up extra health that will then get calculated as bonus healing during the percent missing health calculation. That does also change the breakpoint on the D shield and stuff, and so for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to pretend that they don't get any more health from anything else, which would lead to bigger healing numbers, which then leads to bigger healing reduction numbers. So I'm just going to keep it simple by capping it at 75%, pretending that they're never going to get hit past that, which is just max D-shield healing, as well as never having to calculate what their exact health values were at that such situation. So these are all the values that we're going to use for our calculations, which are waiting for us down here. I'm going to be using Akali as the base example here because she has slightly lower max health values, which means slightly less from, again, the second wind. I'm not trying to overestimate exactly how much healing you're going to get. Just know that these are like some things that are going to reduce the upper end of the healing. So the natural healing formula is going to be HP per 5. And the reason I'm going to change it into HP per second is because Grievous Wounds applies for 3 seconds. And so if I can tell you how much health you were going to regen over a 3-second window, I can then tell you how much is being cut every second. And so you can see that I've taken the range of HP per 5 that she'll get from level 5 to level 10 plus 6 divided by 5. And that'll give you the range of healing roughly 3.556 per second through 4.394 per second, which then will get reduced to 0.889 per second through 1 per second. D-Shield is calculated as 0 to 40 flat health healed over 8 seconds based on the amount of health that you have missing at the time. So if you're at full health and you basically get hit by a spell, it's effectively not going to heal you for anything, whereas if you're at 75 or below, you're going to get the full 40 health over 8 seconds. This translates from 0 to 5 health per second, which will translate to a reduction of 0 to 1.25 per second. Interesting note about D-Shield and why this shit is basically impossible to calculate manually is because D-Shield has a priority heal system such that whatever proc of damage would lead to the highest value of healing per second will be what is chosen to become your heal per second. And this is important because when D-Shield is procced by AoE abilities, damage over time abilities, or proc abilities, which I assume is something like a Scorch, I'm not exactly sure. But when it's procced by anything like that, it will actually be reduced to 66% healing. So in those situations, you will get less healing, but it will calculate it based off what will be more healing. So if you get hit with a single target ability at the same time as you get hit with an AoE ability, it will take the higher value of the two. Additionally, if you get hit with, let's say, a single target ability at 25% missing health, but then get hit by an AoE ability at 50% missing health, it'll calculate which one has higher missing health and will return more health during this duration and apply that to the queue. But both hits are logged and queued into the system and will tick over the 8 seconds. And if one of them finishes its tick before the other one, the lower regen value, let's say, has 2 seconds left on it by the time this 8 have ticked off here, because this one was applied 2 seconds later, it will then drop its healing reduction to this one for the next 2 seconds. So there's a really fucked up queue system here, which is honestly a good implementation in the game in terms of doing what it says it's going to do, but makes manual calculations impossible. Basically, all that is to say is that D-Shield optimizes for trying to return the most amount of health in every situation that it logically can. And in that case, I'm just going to accept the ranges at the face value of 0 to 5 per second. Pot/refillable is 8 for a health potion and 8.33 per second for a refillable potion. And for the sake of calculations here, I'm just going to round down to 8, which will reduce to 0 or 2 health per second reduced depending on if the pot is on or not. Finally, second win, worst of all, goes from a 3 plus 4% missing health combined over 10. Realistically, the parentheses should be there. I apologize for any math nerds. And this is, of course, going to scale with whatever your max health value can possibly be. I'm not sure if it has a queue system like D-Shield. I assume it does. And again, I'm just going to ignore that queue system because you can't calculate that kind of stuff perfectly, and just go from what is the minimum value, which is just the 3, assuming that you're getting hit at max health, or the 75%. I'm not going to calculate what if you get hit at 20% health left? What if you get hit at 10% health left? And trying to optimize for that situation. And in the case where you're stopping the health regen at max value at a level 10 Akali is what I've done for the upper range here. As well as you can see, this is the upper range of the level 10 HP per 5 regen for Akali. This is now her 75% missing health at level 10 with no Hex Tech alternator or any kind of other health items other than the D-Shield 80. And that will calculate out to 1.125 health reduced per second. So in lane phase, versing a level 5 Akali going up to a level 10 Akali, you'll be reducing anywhere from 0.964 health per second if you tag them with an ability through 5.525 health per second when tagged with ability. This debuff lasts for 3 seconds, which means at minimum, you'll be reducing 2.9 basically health per second up to roughly 17 health per second if the pot is on and they're level 10 and they're pretty chunk low. So that is the range of values you're going to get for Akali. They will be slightly higher for Sylas, having more health. And again, this can scale upwards depending on what values you're hitting them at if they have extra missing health. But I will just leave them at this range. And I want to just do a quick comparison to Blasting Wand, which people talk about being an option that you could go in situations where you don't want to go for this Oblivion Orb. People say you'll get 5 more AP off of a Blasting Wand. It costs 50 gold more. I think it's comparable enough considering usually people aren't basing it exactly 800 gold and they could afford this one instead. And just showing typical trade patterns, what 5 extra AP would give you. So if Ari, which is one of the champions Zeka built this on, went for a Blasting Wand instead and hit him with a full combo, you'll be doing 9.4 damage, which is somewhere in this range. It's a little bit more on average. Maybe, it's hard to say. But the other thing is that this damage gets reduced by MR. Usually these Sylases are going for Merc Treads, and if they're not, they're still getting some base MR at 40, which is what they'll usually be at around level 5 and scaling up a little bit through level 10. And if they have their Merc Treads, it'll get all the way up to around level 75 MR by level 10. And so with that reduction, a full combo becomes 6.7. And for Azir, which is like you press W, auto, Q auto kind of thing, then you're getting 7 damage, which is reduced to 5 or 4, which is again starting to move into the low end here. And this is every spell damage proc, and it gets refreshed upon multiple proc durations. And so if you just land a single ability at will become the kind of breakpoint of the middle of this, usually, as you'll see in a second, you're getting basically the same amount of damage as a full combo and substantially more than a single one of these ratio values at 5 AP. So all this is to say that realistically, no, these are going to be lower values in realistic trades, and the Oblivion Orb will usually be more damage reduced through healing regen cut. So now let's kind of use these numbers to get a ballpark estimate of the amount of heal regen cut that is coming through in a game that actually happened when Faker in semifinals, as you can see, base around 5 minutes, like I said, was forced out of lane after he forced Yagao. Yagao had to TP back into lane early. Faker is about to TP back into lane with his Oblivion Orb. And as you can see, D-Shield completed on Yagao. He is running Resolve second and will have second win taken here. So we're going to watch exactly how long of an uptime Faker is going to be able to have on his procs with the Grievous Wounds, as well as roughly what Yagao's HP values are going to be during this time frame. Yagao is going to let this wave crash under his turret, and Faker's going to harass him underneath here. Lands a Q auto poke. You can see that the broken heart symbol thing right next to him is going to be on this entire time. And it times out there. So if you go back to when the first application of this Grievous Wounds was, he is, I would say, around 50% health, but I'm going to, again, I'm trying not to overestimate the healing regen here. I'm doing my best to make this look as bad as possible. He's clearly below 60% health here, realistically around 50, but we're going to take the mid breakpoint of D-Shield healing from this point in the game. Additionally, that tag was at 5 minutes and 22 seconds, and if you count the uptime on this health, the little broken heart thingy on him, I'm sorry for the lag in my recording video. Hopefully the editor can just fix this in post. It's going to time out right around 5:33. We'll just say 5:32 and take a flat 10 seconds as a fair estimate of exactly how long that was on. I'm going to skip the amount of healing reduced per second calculations and just trust me, I'm using the formulas I've developed up here. For Faker versus Sylas at level 5 with him at 62.5% max health, and the calculations are his flat HP reduction, the reduction of the D-Shield healing, and the reduction of the second win healing. And this is all with no pot, totaling 1.77 per second. So over that 10-second window, he is going to put him at 17.8 less health. However, as you can see at different points in this clip, he's pretty clearly a lot closer to 25% max health here, and so realistically this value will be more than that. Let's say Faker put him down for this entire time window at 25% health, which obviously he didn't, it's somewhere in between, but we re-get these values again. For no pot situation, 2.5 health per second reduced over those 10 seconds is 25.8 health reduced. However, there's going to be a gank attempt onto Faker just seconds after this little clip that we were looking at before with the 10-second uptime, and Faker's going to get a little bit more trade damage onto him yet again here, this time with the pot ticking on Yagao, which he popped in case that they actually fought out this entire gank sequence. You'll see that Faker's going to get basically 2 applications of it, which will total around 4 seconds of the pot running, much closer to the 25% max health value than the 65% max health value, but we'll take a look at both of them. 62.5, excuse me. So here you go. There's the auto Q auto combination. He took that at around 539. If you go and freeze frame it at 539, you'll see that's when the first part of the broken heart symbol is there, and it wears off right at 544 again. So if you go look at these two values again, including the pot pop during these times, it's 3.77 health reduced per second if he was at 62.5% max HP, or 4.58 health per second reduced if they were at 25% HP. If you calculate with a 4-second uptime of the Grievous Wounds debuff applied, it's somewhere between 15 and 18 more health reduced during this lane phase. Those two trades combined are giving an upper limit of around 44 extra health reduced with a lower limit of like 32. We'll get into it whether or not you think that 32 through 44 health reduced over that 25-second trade window was worth it or not when we analyze the rest of these games, but I at least want to show you how these calculations are being done when I continue talking about them. Looking back at the tooltip screenshot and what it says, you can see that this is more value than it apparently has for the first 10 minutes that it got in a 25-second trade window, which is a very good trade for the faker, which I don't want to pretend it wasn't, but it just goes to show that it's missing over 100% of the value that it supposedly is reporting with this tooltip. And why I don't think you can realistically look at these tooltips and think that they are at all accurate of whether or not you used this item well or not in lane phase. I want to redefine what Oblivion Orb's passive says in lane phase for people who don't get it in this matchup and still think the healing numbers aren't that significant. Imagine if this item said, for 800 gold, you will get 35 AP and a passive that will deal 3 through 17 bonus true damage over the course of 3 seconds every time you strike an opponent with a magic damage source. That sounds pretty fucking good, right? And that's not even including the actual healing reduction that you would get from combat sources of healing, not just regen. If you reframe what Oblivion Orb is doing as just a guaranteed true damage burn over 3 seconds, I think people would be a lot more favorable with how it sounds. But because the healing regen part isn't reported at all, people just assume that it's not doing that, but it is. When I say people as well, I'm not talking about the content creators. I think most of them know, but just when we do these screenshots, a lot of fans and regular people online looking at this analysis don't understand how much it's actually reducing potentially in low health situations. If you calculate what I think is a pretty fair average value per magic damage strike, being this reduction right here with no pot on over the course of 3 seconds, calculating at 62.5%, and this is the level 5 Silas as well with no bonus HP items, you'll get roughly 5 extra damage on every spell cast that you do. That sounds decent. As you can probably tell from the wardrobe change and beard growth, I recorded the rest of this video before I learned this info. So in the future, when I say roughly between 100 and 200 damage, those were estimates based off my calcs, but now you can watch and know that my calcs were pretty damn accurate. For reference, the first Zeka versus Chovy game, which I'm gonna say is not really worth it in the later parts of this video, that had reduced 103 between 5 and 10 minutes. So on the low end of the 100 to 200 estimate, but that is a fair estimate for what this value of the item is going to be. So now that we've kind of reframed Oblivion Orb's passive to more accurately represent what it's doing in lane phase, the question is still whether or not it's worth that for delaying your mythic. And so I want to start talking about build paths and some of the things that it does give you advantages in that are not immediately obvious just from the damage numbers. First off is that Oblivion Orb is basically stat efficient on its own, and the other options at this gold value are not particularly great. You can basically build components of Lost Chapter. You can grab a Blasting Wand, which can build into Ludens if you're going that path, but if you're not, it doesn't immediately build into anything either, and like we already showed, it's basically a DPS lost than going Oblivion Orb, and you can maybe go Fiendish Codex at 900, but the price is starting to creep up here, and it's going to hurt your ability to buy pink wards and pots and other things when you TP back into the lane phase. Here's the crux of it though. At 800 gold, there is no single item a mage and mid lane can purchase to increase their damage more than Oblivion Orb, and so if your mindset is, I want to bully this lane as hard as possible, this is mathematically the strongest item you can build. The other thing about build paths is if you know that you're going to go for this item because you want to play as aggressively as possible, you can shift your entire lane phase around this new knowledge. And that's exactly what pros who are doing this do. Most traditional mage matchups will often try and greed out till around 1300 gold for Lost Chapter and for a bit of an easy mode laning phase, which is something the melee matchups that go this heavy regen build are kind of counting on, because you get trapped in a lane phase where you can't blow slow all your mana, harassing them through the early levels quite as hard as you would want to, else you'll go and you don't have Lost Chapter yet, and so their regen has extra time trapped in this lane phase to tick up and allow them to not be under as much pressure. I also think that the importance of insta-rushing your mythic / first item is being somewhat overstated. In the long history of League of Legends, there's plenty of times where you stop down for components or stacking Doran's items or whatever it is, and even in current build paths, there's not many that straight out rush mythic straight start to finish without stopping down for picking up extra Doran's items as well, or starter items, picking up early resists in certain matchups, or completing boots 2 or whatnot. Straight mythic rushes are not like that common. I understand that this is going to set you back a little bit more, as well as give you an item that you typically wouldn't build until the later portions of the game, but I'm just noting that Mythic Rush is not like the standard play for most builds. In practice and in pro play though, most mid laners actually reset before that 1300 gold breakpoint anyways, for a couple reasons. One, because they want to shove and control mid wave for a prio on certain plays or whatnot, or the melee matchups themselves will take more aggressive trades, forcing both people back, and they'll go back and TP for components and TP back in the lane with just those and force the mage to match them. And so this mage build is a bit of an adaptation to that, saying, okay, if you're going to go for cheap components and just want to reset so you can regen trap me in lane, I'm going to build this really aggressive item and try and shit on you and shove you out of lane again after that first reset. You can see that's exactly what Faker and Zeka do here in their games, as they shove as aggressively as possible and hit their resets between the 4:30 and 5-minute mark, oftentimes forcing the opponent to recall first. It doesn't happen exactly in these situations because the games get a little scrappy, but after you TP back with none of the mana crystal that you would normally have, you could be a little scared about running in this second lane phase with no TP back in the lane. But second blue buff is usually spawning at around, 7:30 or something like that. And so you can kind of lane aggressively still, knowing that your second blue buff will top you up and can continue to pressure throughout the lane phase. And even if you don't get it, which is the situation here, neither one of the mid laners we're going to look at get their blue buff, they still are able to control their mana correctly because they're pro players. Playing this way is risky, and I won't deny that. But if you play it correctly, you should theoretically control mid lane through the first 14 minutes of the game, buying your jungler, prio, being able to contest objectives and do all this kind of stuff, which is exactly what Zeka does, and we'll see that in a minute here. And that's why I think people are going for this build. Again, Oblivion Orb is not getting value out of combat heal cut, but regen heal cut. And in most of these lanes, you're trading pretty heavily as the mage, trying to shove them back. They're trying to face tank while CSing. And if they don't avoid the heal cut and pop a pot in their trades as well, you can get a lot of value out of it over the course of this kind of 6-7 minutes of laning phase that you'll have between level 5 and level 11. Now we're going to look at some examples here, and I do want to make a caveat that I don't want to overstate Oblivion Orb's purchase here, because it's almost a little bit of a tautology. Its value comes from the assumption that you're going to be winning the matchup and taking good trades, and you're going to be trying to snowball that lead as much as possible. But you're already kind of winning the matchup and making good trades, and you can argue that all the examples we're going to look at could theoretically still have happened with any other purchase. But we don't know if that's true or not, because then we're just talking about hypotheticals. And so the fact that a lot of mid laners are going for it shows that they think that this matters, and we'll see if you agree by the end of these examples. We've already looked at Faker's trade example up above, but let's take into account the effects of these trades. Yagao is forced back to base, giving T1 the dragon, but again, they might have gotten it anyways. Remember, Yagao is missing roughly 32 through 44-ish more health than he normally would have had because of this purchase, but honestly, they probably would have got the Drake anyways when he resets. Faker is a pretty team-focused player though, so rather than going chip damage on turret and trying to get turret plates, he actually focuses on hovering in bot river here for a potential 4-man dive with owner before returning mid. He doesn't get much done for the rest of the laning phase, to be honest, but I will note that it's largely because this awkward Herald standoff situation breaks out, and Faker does reduce a lot of healing on people in this team fight that does not get noted in the tooltip. When he gets the attacks on the potted up Karma when he shuffles in, he horribly botches that shuffle, by the way, but again, that doesn't really change what the build path would have done in this situation. He would have just been further and closer to Mythic. Now, are any of these team fight situations of health regen cut relevant? I don't actually think so, but it is just worth noting how shit the tooltip is for accurately representing how much value this item got, because he reduced a lot of healing on the Karma there who was potted up. Now let's look at the Zeka example. Again, there is a lot of pre-recall trading. He shoves the wave and comes back with only about a 5 CS lead. Unfortunately, this game is not going to show much of the mid wave, but we'll do our best by looking just at the icons. In the picture-in-picture, you can see that Chovy forces an all-in on Zeka at 6. I don't think that Chovy thinks he can get the kill, but he wants to tax Ahri's mana pool since this does not go the mana crystal, and he thinks that he can just sustain through afterwards with the D shield and all the pots and things that we talk about the melees wanting to do in the matchup. At the start of the fight, we can see the Q hit from Zeka, and so this entire trade sequence will basically happen with Grievous Wounds on. But we can see Chovy holds his pot because clearly he wants to use it after the trade of ults begins, and then he can use that to recontrol the wave. However, even after popping his pot, we can see on the icon that Chovy's HP drops multiple times. So we know it's not just autos hitting him, but most likely spells as well, which is keeping him low under the turret when he's trying to CS and start getting his HP back up. The heal regen cut through all this kind of trading is probably around 50-ish lower than he wants to, similar to the Faker example, and it ends up trapping him in lane phase. Factoring in the heal regen cut over these trade sequences, it's probably around 50 HP lower than Chovy wanted to be by the end of it. And he's trapped in lane phase, which sees jungle control over to DRX. And Pioshik hounds Peanut relentlessly. This is a combination of mid and jungle pressure that gives Zeka some plates and allows the CS to grow by about 20 until the next reset, allowing him to grab Lost Chapter. Now, would Zeka not have gotten these leads if he didn't go the Oblivion Orb? I don't know, but my bigger point with all this is that clearly the tooltip check is absolutely useless for determining if this was a good purchase or not, considering it says that he had 0 healing reduced over the course of the 10 minutes of the early game, which you can see it's getting value with these trades. Is it enough value is a different question. When they get back to lane, Zeka instantly grabs control with a good trade and then locks Chovy under his turret again. There's more trading that's happening off screen, but it's pretty easy to assume that whenever Chovy's going for minions, Zeka is popping W or landing a Q and getting free damage and Grievous Wound procs on him. It's fair to note that Chovy is just playing the lane poorly here. I have no idea why he E's into a full creep wave and then takes a free charm from Ahri. This mid control allows DRX to grab a free uncontested Herald, during which time Zeka continues to shit on Chovy under the turret, getting 2 more good trades off. And then DRX will use this window to completely blow open mid. Reminder that the tooltip says 0 healing reduced at the 15-minute window, despite the fact that we just saw 6 seconds of uptime during a potted up Chovy. So clearly it's getting more value again than the tooltip is saying. The tooltip's probably wrong by anywhere from 100 to 200 healing reduced, depending on how much uptime he's really getting during potted up sequences. Now, regardless again of what the tooltip says, the real question is whether or not you needed the Oblivion Orb to win the lane that hard, or could you have skipped it and gone mythic? But in this case, I'm pretty down with the Oblivion Orb, even though it says 0 heal cut applied. I think it pretty clearly had massive value when locking Chovy underneath his turret for this extended laning phase, and served as a linchpin for the early game for DRX, who had an abysmal start to the early game. You need to remember that this is when there was a split map situation and your Kate Lux lane dies level 2 or level 3 or whatever it is, and are not able to get a trade kill at all. So this was a terrible start for DRX, that the entire early game hinged on the fact that the Ahri was shitting on the Sylas. Now, I know the comment section of this video is probably going to turn into a rage war, and I really don't want it to turn to slamming creators for having their opinions reverse my opinions and starting to get into really weird arguments. If you're going to rage about anything, just argue about whether or not you think this Oblivion Orb mattered during the lane phase. That's the only kind of arguments I realistically want to see here. A few quick more points before we wrap the video here. I highly doubt most pros have calced out the damage of the heal cut on regen that the Oblivion Orb is doing. Some do the math, some get it from analysts, but a lot more just go through trial and error and intuition. And the reality is, I could see a world where you hate the garage sale build. I hope most of them do, where you have to go these components at this really awkward item window when you have like 1,000 gold, and the Oblivion Orb plus some pots and a pink ward felt a lot better, especially when you get to play it a few times. And even if you don't know exactly how much, you start to feel the dozens, 50, upwards between 100 and 200 health that is now missing on your opponent, depending on how long you had them trapped in lane phase with you. That is tangible and something that I think pros will probably pick up on and decide, actually, this feels really good now that they're at lower HP values than they usually are with a component build. Now, maybe that net gain is not worth it, which again is a fair argument to have, which maybe it feels good, but doesn't really matter, and you can hold that opinion. But it's at least close enough to say, who gives a fuck if the tooltip reads 0? Are you really mad that Zeka shit on Chovy so hard that the Sylas couldn't press W on him else he's dead? To state my conclusion one final time, in winning matchups that want to push their lead as much as possible, no item around this gold value can give you mathematically more damage than the Oblivion Orb can in these matchups. and the item is still providing value regardless of what that damn tooltip says. Whether it was good or bad in each case is a different story. For example, in game 1 when Zeka built it, I think the idea was fine on the Azir, but there was some really weird gain states that developed because of the swap that Gen G did, making their bot lane go top and DRX not matching, which put this really awkward pressure on Zeka where he was not in an isolated 1v1 against his laner. If you're not going to get isolated 1v1s, it's probably not as valuable. Anyways, that's gonna do it for this episode of The Blame Game. I hope you all enjoyed watching this video, watching math. I bet most of you fucking skipped it. You know what? I'm gonna watch the most replayed section of this video, and if it's not the math section, then I know you guys skipped over that. All right? And if I see anyone raging down in the comments and you didn't watch the math section, I'll know you're a fool. Anyways, catch you guys for the finals. Hotline League live, San Francisco. I hope they cut out this awkward pause and you didn't just see me stare into the camera for 3 seconds. Anyways, goodbye.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching that video. I'm at Worlds right now, and I would not be here live watching games that have no Western teams in them whatsoever, but still having a good time. If it wasn't for Alienware sponsoring our trip out here, we've done a whole bunch of stuff, and it couldn't have happened without them. So thank you so much to Alienware. If you want to support them supporting me, please click the link in the description below and purchase something. It doesn't even have to be a computer. I mean, it could be, but it could also be like a headset or a monitor. Anyway, they make great stuff. Check them out.